While the nation slept, Republicans found the votes and today passed President Trump's economic agenda, his signature, and fireworks tomorrow. The president of the NAACP tells us what he fears about the Trump bill and why, for the very first time, his organization did not invite a sitting president to its national convention. How well do you know the history of Independence Day? How should we think about America's upcoming 250th birthday? We will ask historian Douglas Brinkley. Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to the Takeout. A good many of you believe, for various reasons, that this place, Washington, D.C., is warped, out of kilter, a sort of make-believe land where politics and scheming distort reality, or at least try to. And yet, what happens here drives outcomes across the country. So it was today, as President Trump's massive economic bill passed the House of Representatives and now heads to his desk for a celebratory signing tomorrow on the 4th of July, just as he demanded. This is a singular legislative victory for the president and his party, codification, if you will, of the 2024 election results. Republicans and the president now own at least three big things until the next election: the state of the U.S. economy, the national debt, and the availability of health care and food assistance to those living at the margins. Democrats paint a dark, neo-authoritarian picture of coming attractions. Republicans promise nothing but golden prosperity and security. This divergent rhetoric itself is sort of, warped. But the real and slightly comical warping here can be found in the concept of time. Consider, House votes announced as lasting 15 minutes this week were held open for more than 7 hours. This morning, the House Democratic leader, Hakeem Jeffries, claimed an allotted 1 minute of debate time and then spoke for 8 hours, 44 minutes, a new House record. That speech delayed but did not stop the inevitable passage of the Trump agenda. We turn now to Nicole Killian on Capitol Hill, where the space-time continuum was stretched almost to the breaking point and the legislation passed. Nicole, great to see you.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, look, we saw a similar cadence in the Senate where we had a number of starts and stops. Obviously, Republicans had some issues coming out of the gate in terms of just being able to clear some of the procedural votes to move forward with this bill. And then once that finally happened, we saw Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries utilize this procedural tool known as a magic minute to try to slow down passage, speaking for over 8 hours. In fact, breaking Kevin McCarthy's past record of 8 hours and 32 minutes. But ultimately, the bill did clear the chamber. There were two Republicans who voted against the package, Tom Massey and Brian Fitzpatrick. But this reaffirms certainly the Speaker's confidence. He had projected confidence, of course, throughout this process that ultimately he would not only be able to get this measure passed, but get it in time to meet the president's deadline of July 4th, which, as you just noted, will be the backdrop for fireworks and now this signing ceremony.
Nicole, later in the program, we're going to talk to a couple of Republicans who were in the center of those conversations, going from, in one case, no to yes, and being part of those broader arm-twisting conversations. But remind our viewers, what are the biggest component parts of this legislation that will very soon become the law of the land?
Well, of course, the whole impetus for this was to extend the president's 2017 tax cut. So by and large, that is what it does, in addition to funding some of his other key priorities, like expanding security at the border, ICE enforcement, fortifying the wall, et cetera. Also increases in funding for defense. But in order to pay for this big, beautiful bill, that is why we saw a number of deep spending cuts to the tune of $1.5 trillion, which comes in the form of making some reforms to Medicaid, to SNAP and food assistance, also rolling back a number of clean energy tax credits under the Biden administration that were just passed through the Inflation Reduction Act. So that is what this bill looks like on balance.
It was a long night, a series of long nights. Nicole, my very deep thanks to you and all of your team on Capitol Hill for doing such a formidable job tracking every bit of the outcome of this legislation. Thank you so very much. I want to turn now to Huie Burns, who joins me from Des Moines, Iowa, where President Trump is scheduled to deliver remarks later this evening. She spent the day in Des Moines talking to voters about this legislation. Caitlin, so great to have you with us. What'd you learn?
Hey, Major. Well, as you know, Donald Trump came to Iowa many times during his campaign, and this is where he made those key campaign promises. No taxes on tips, no taxes on overtime pay, and other agenda items. So we wanted to come here with him. You can see he's going to speak later tonight and figure out how voters were assessing the impact of this on their own lives. So we started out at a place you have probably frequented, Major, during your campaign travels, Smitty's Tenderloin in Des Moines. Those iconic big pork sandwiches. And we talked to the owner and a server there, longtime server, about what kind of impact they are going to see, especially with the elimination of federal taxes on tips. Here's what they had to say.
I'll be retiring soon, so, but for our future, I think it'll help our waitresses and encourage more to be waitresses, you know, because of the level of the pay they get now. They have to claim so much, and then now taking that away from them, they're going to be able to benefit a lot better.
That would really help to expand their income in ways that maybe we haven't been able to as employers because of the hardships over the past few years. We've had to make some cutbacks as far as our controlling our food costs and controlling our labor.
So it was interesting, Major, because as we were talking to them, Mike Johnson was laying down the gavel announcing that this vote had passed, this bill had passed. And it was interesting watching that from Iowa because we weren't the only ones watching it. The owner of Smitty's had told us that he had been monitoring this all morning, watching early in the morning to see what the latest status of this bill was. And so he was making the argument that he was going to see benefits from this bill. But we also talked to people who were anxious about it as well.
What do they have to say, Caitlin, the anxious ones?
Yeah, you know, Major, it's very interesting being on the ground in a state like this because you can be in a tiny restaurant and hear very different points of view. And so we spoke with a woman named Janie, and she said that she's all for eliminating taxes on tips. She's glad for those serving her that they can have that benefit, but she was personally concerned about the cuts to Medicaid. She says her cousin relies on the program, and she was concerned about this impact they could have on her, and as well as just generally some of these cuts and the way that they could affect other people. Here's what she had to say.
I was concerned about the doing away with a lot of the Medicaid insurers. How are they going to distinguish the ones that keep Medicaid and those that I mean, if they're abusing it, of course, but my goodness, how are they going to decipher that?
Now, Major, as you know, this is a over 900-page bill. This is going to take a while for people to understand what's in it and what's in it for them. And so that's where you're going to see a lot of this political messaging coming from both sides. It's something that Donald Trump hopes to start today to really sell this bill to the public.
Huie Burns, I'm grateful for your perspective from Des Moines, Iowa, giving us an early read on reaction to passage of this big legislation. Thank you so very much. Earlier today, I spoke with Andy Ogles, a Republican House member who just days ago expressed strong opposition to the Senate version of the president's budget bill, which he voted in favor of today. Here's our conversation. Congressman, I'm glad you joined us because you might be a living example of the power of politics of persuasion under deadline, because a couple of days ago, and I'm going to quote to you some things written in Tennessee about your position on the bill just Tuesday afternoon. Complaints that it would force your constituents to pay for illegal aliens' health care, I'm quoting here now, and not doing enough to halt taxpayer dollars for subsidizing green energy projects, yet you voted yes. So how did you get from those substantial objections to yes?
Yeah, great question. You know, one of the things that we worked on as it was continuing to be worked on, even with the wraparound amendment in the Senate, is making sure that the language in the bill was strengthened to address our concerns. And then if anything couldn't be addressed in the Senate version because of the parliamentarian, we worked closely with the White House, with the administration, to make sure there was after action that could be taken to address those concerns. And so as a member of the House of Representatives, we argue, we debate, and we fight to give the best product, quite frankly, for the American people. John Quincy Adams loved the House of Representatives because we argue and we debate. That's what we did, and we have a big, beautiful bill for the American people.
I'm still confused, though, because in a statement you released on Tuesday, you said the Senate bill, which to my knowledge has not been materially changed, hasn't been changed at all, in your words, guts key Trump provisions.
Well, so in the House version, there was a penalty with the FMAP, the Medicaid reimbursement. That was taken out. But again, we've worked with the administration, and there's mechanisms that we'll work on without going into details to make sure that those types of provisions are upheld, but just through a different mechanism.
It has been said by some of your colleagues that in those conversations with senior administration officials and the president directly, those of you who had concerns were told these would be addressed by executive orders. Is that true?
Well, there's a lot. I mean, first of all, when you're looking at a big piece of legislation like this, there's lots of mechanisms that can be used. So whether it's executive orders, whether it's further action from the House, or quite frankly, through the Justice Department, if you have a state that's not compliant. So depending on the situation, there's lots of ways we can tackle these issues. But at the end of the day, the tax cuts are permanent. The border is secure. No tax on tips. It is win after win after winner. Look, the only thing hotter than the temperatures across the nation is the winning by the President of the United States, Donald Trump.
And Congressman, and I just want to continue quoting you because I love to do that with members. You said it would be okay to ping pong this back and forth with the Senate. The legislative process allows for that.
That's right.
Why not go through that to make sure that this is a legislative product as opposed to a legislative product with all sorts of maybe add-ons from the administration or maybe not?
Well, so when you look at the process, so I carried the amendment, which was amendment number 4, the first Republican. I carried the amendment that would revert it back to House Bill 1. Working with the Speaker, working with the President. I was with the President at the White House for a couple of hours yesterday. Later, I was on a conference call with a multitude of members, again, working the bill, making sure that every question was answered. But ultimately, the play call was made that we were better off moving with this mechanism, with this piece of legislation, the big, beautiful bill, and quite frankly, we got it done. We worked together as a team, and we delivered it for the American people.
It has been said this morning by some who analyze the work of this Congress that in the end, whether it's the right flank or the moderate flank, all flanks cave ultimately to President Trump.
Well, you know, the left-wing media tends to report, bad news instead of looking at the obvious. This is a historic, monumental win for the American people. This is why President Trump should be considered, why I have an amendment to give him a 3rd term. This is why a lot of people up here are talking about him being added to Mount Rushmore. It's win after win after win. He's an historic president who delivered a historic victory for the American people, for the markets, and quite frankly, if you're a business owner, if you're someone that's concerned about crime in your community, this bill delivered for you.
Well, since you mentioned it, Congressman, I'll give you a chance to put voice behind it. Why does President Trump deserve a 3rd term, and why should he be on Mount Rushmore?
Absolutely. Look, when you look at the victories, I mean, no one thought that Iran could be taken out as effortlessly and perfectly as was just done by the amazing United States military under the direction of President Trump. We win and we win and we win. And so when you look at the 3rd term argument, you had an election that arguably was stolen. There was fraud all across this country. And President Trump, when you look at what he's done to change the trajectory of this country economically from a foreign policy standpoint over and over again, this is why someone like him and why my amendment would allow someone who has served 2 non-consecutive terms, like President Trump, to have a 3rd bite at the apple. Now, look, that has to pass the House, has to pass the Senate, has to be ratified by the states. But at the end of the day, there is a process for something like this to happen.
Congressman, I'm glad you came on the show, but you and I will never agree about what you just said about the 2020 election. It was adjudicated in the courts. Defamation suits have been filed against people who made accusations. When asked for evidence, they have not provided in court. But we'll move beyond that.
It's clearly been stated and proven there was fraud across the country. Whether or not it changed the outcome of the election, to be determined, and quite frankly, maybe we'll never know. But at the end of the day, President Trump, because the American people were sick and tired of a woke Biden administration, the border, we were invaded, 10 million illegals. We won the popular vote, we won the Electoral College, and we won every single battleground state, and we're going to win the midterms.
You and I will never disagree about the outcome of the 2024 election. We will agree politely to disagree about what happened in 2020. Last thing before I let you go, paint me a picture, Congressman, of what America looks like economically 1 year from tomorrow when the president signs this legislation.
Yeah, I mean, you're truly going to see the unleashing of the American economy. You're going to see interest rates coming down. There's a lot of positive things that are going to be happening. It takes time. That's why the Speaker and the President wanted to see this 4th of July deadline, so that these types of changes, this type of piece of legislation, quite frankly, could have time to get into the system, to signal to the markets, to make the Trump tax cuts permanent. And quite frankly, whether you're a small business owner or a foreign investor wanting to start a business here in the United States of America, you want to know that framework. You want to know that we have our fiscal house in order. Look, the bill's not perfect, but it's a step in the right direction to change the course and the trajectory of this nation. There's more work to be done. I acknowledge that, but this was the first step. It's kind of like building a foundation for a house. We built the foundation. Now let's get more work done.
Last thing, and millions will not be knocked off health care, and millions will not be losing vital nutrition assistance?
Well, look, there's a lot of folks on Medicaid, illegals, able-bodied individuals who, quite frankly, shouldn't be on Medicaid to begin with. But there's a process for everyone to be looked at. And look, if you're here illegally, you might as well go ahead and self-deport. We have laws. You came here illegally. It's time to go home.
Congressman Andy Ogles, I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Still to come, July 4th, fireworks, family, and a celebration of American freedom. So why did President John Adams say way back when that July 2nd should be our public day of pomp and parade?
You never really want to cross the president of your own party.
South Dakota Republican Congressman Dusty Johnson is usually in the middle of every big showdown on Capitol Hill. He explains how the Trump mega bill came together and why the NAACP is breaking tradition. I'll speak to the group's leader about not inviting the president to its annual convention. Next on The Takeout. Welcome back. The NAACP is breaking a 116-year tradition of inviting the president, the sitting president, to its annual convention. Earlier today, I spoke to the organization's president and CEO, Derek Johnson, and we started with a conversation about how he views the just-passed presidential economic bill.
Well, what we're looking at is a massive transfer of economic opportunities for the wealthiest individuals on the globe. As we studied the bill, there'll be $930 billion in cuts to Medicaid, which is inclusive of care for our elderly, Affordable Care Act, and so many Americans who depend on the health benefits of our government to provide in their critical needs. So they can also give $910 billion in tax cuts. That's unconscionable. We're looking at a piece of public policy that takes us back to the Gilded Age prior to New Deal policies of 1932. It is unfortunate. We've tried this in this country before. It never benefits the majority of Americans. It always gives more profit and opportunities to the wealthiest individuals on the globe.
Derek, as you well know, the NAACP convention is coming up. For the first time in its history, President Trump, meaning a sitting U.S. president, will not be invited. I came across some comments from Stephen A. Smith, who's a pretty prominent and vocal participant in our large American conversation about sports, culture, politics, and a lot of other things. And basically what he said was, if you don't invite him and you are ostracizing him, and if you're ignoring him, how does that advance anything that the NAACP is trying to accomplish? How do you respond to that criticism from Stephen A. Smith?
Anytime I'm looking for advice about sports analysis, sports commentary, I go and I will listen to him among others. But when it comes to politics, policy, and what we should do as an organization, he's the last person I will go to. It is really important for all Americans to understand the role of the NAACP is to make democracy work for all. We embrace the Constitution. We respect the contributions that everyone brings to the table. And what we've witnessed since January 20th is a president who issued multiple executive orders that are unconstitutional, and the courts have found that to be. We've witnessed an individual who have demeaned due process rights for human beings, regardless of their citizenship status. The Constitution is really clear. People should be afforded due process rights. We fight hard for the protection of all citizens. Equal rights under the Constitution is something that we strive for. We don't care whether you're black, white, male, female, or however. Everyone should be afforded with the same opportunities to participate. And if anyone decides that they don't believe that should be the case, they have not earned the right to stand on our stage.
And when Stephen A. Smith says, by not inviting Trump, you are shutting down potential dialogue, what do you say?
I say he's absolutely wrong. We invited him as candidate Trump in 2016. We invited him all 4 years when he was in office. He was invited in 2020 when he was back candidate Trump, and he has yet to ever accept the invitation. But this time, it's like, not only are we not going to waste the invitation, we don't want him on our stage because what he has done in the past, he displays the lack of discipline when he gets the microphone, and he does not respect the Constitution. We embrace the Constitution, and we would not invite anyone on our stage who simply cannot agree on the guardrails of a constitutional democracy, and that's something we don't see him respecting.
Derek, I want to give you some statistics I'm going to guess you're pretty familiar with. 2016, 6% of black voters in America supported candidate Donald Trump. In 2020, 8% of black voters supported President Trump for re-election. In 2024, 15% of black voters supported President Trump. What does that movement, that near doubling of support from 2020 to 2024 tell you?
Well, first of all, African-American communities has never been a monolith in terms of our political approach. And political parties are nothing more than vehicles for agendas. Now, when it comes to the specific statistics you're providing, I've heard different statistics shared. I have yet to see any of it verified because exit polls have always been unreliable. Much of the polling we've seen over the last 20 years have been wrong on the outcome of the elections. And I've been trying to figure out where are these numbers coming from? Is it verifiable? But it's great talking points because people would like to show that there is momentum going in one direction versus another. At the end of the day, we settle our differences at the ballot box. And as a community, we agree the outcome of the election is the outcome of the election. Now, the real question for all of us is, what are the public policy priorities that would embrace all of America, advance America, and to ensure that we have a quality of life that's important? And what are the policies that's going to be advanced to divide America, create a negative environment like we have seen not only in the first days of this administration, but is coming back similar to what we've seen when he was in office before. A very negative environment that otherized communities.
Derek Johnson, president of the NAACP. Always a pleasure, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Still to come right here on The Takeout, with the Republican budget bill now heading to the president's desk, I speak with South Dakota Republican Congressman Dusty Johnson about how it all came together. That's next, right here. That is actor Michael Madsen. He is the cold-blooded killer, Mr. Blonde, in a very memorable, very graphic 1992 film, Reservoir Dogs. Madsen was found dead at his Malibu home earlier today. His death is believed to have been from natural causes. Madsen also starred in classics Kill Bill, Donnie Brasco, among many other films. The actor was 67. Supreme Court will take up 2 state bans excluding transgender student athletes from participating in girls' and women's sports. The justices will hear arguments in cases from West Virginia and Idaho. Lower courts sided with the student athletes and found state laws limiting their participation violated their rights. CBS News' Nicole Skanga reports that the Department of Homeland Security has decided to slash by nearly 3/4 the staff in its Office of Intelligence and Analysis. This office works with state and local law enforcement to provide information on potential threats. Those familiar with the matter say the workforce will be reduced from 1,000 full-time employees to 275. For the 6th time this year, President Trump spoke by phone with Russian President Vladimir Putin. So far, the Trump White House has not shared details of the call, but the Kremlin says the leaders had a, quote, frank and substantive discussion about Ukraine, the Middle East, and Iran. The call follows news that the Pentagon is pausing shipments of some weapons to Ukraine as it reviews the availability of military stockpiles here in the U.S. Freed Hamas hostage Idon Alexander met with President Trump today. Alexander, who was serving in the Israeli military, was held in Gaza for more than a year and a half and released last month. In the video, Alexander claims that when it was announced that Trump had won the 2024 election, Hamas improved its treatment of the hostages. Since his release, Alexander, a dual U.S.-Israeli citizen, has returned to New Jersey. Turning back to our biggest story of the day, Republicans and Democrats in the House, and in the Senate for that matter, have painted 2 very different pictures of the just-passed economic bill with much of the Trump agenda. Earlier, I spoke with South Dakota Republican Congressman Dusty Johnson. Paint a picture of what America looks like economically 1 year from now because of this bill.
I think we see increasing growth. We really do need that. Clearly, the deficit is a problem. Hopefully, people on both sides of the aisle acknowledge that. The solution, Major, is to try to hold the growth of governmental spending to 1% while you're growing the economy at 3%. Over time, that'll slam the jaws of the monster shut. That's why so much of this bill is focused on pro-growth, because we've just got to move that way.
Dusty, in the Trump years leading up to the pandemic, meaning 2018, 2019, when the tax cuts were implemented and in effect, GDP growth was 2.8% and 2.6%, not 3% in either of those 2 years. Does that in any way give you caution about what this bill is going to do, and might you fall short of the OMB, meaning White House economic projections of 3% or higher?
Well, 3% is no guarantee. Like, you really have to have an economy humming to do 3%. So, yeah, that is a bit of an aspirational goal, and yet it is absolutely achievable. Maybe it's 2.8% 1 year, maybe it's 2.9%. As you alluded to, though, I mean, during those earlier Trump years, there was some really robust growth. We saw wage growth growing much faster than inflation, so people were getting more purchasing power. That's not what we have seen in the last 4 years. So getting back to some good wage growth would be exceptionally good news.
Dusty, help my audience understand, because if they went to sleep last night, they could have seen on their phones reports of anywhere from 8 to 10 House Republicans who were no or leaning no, and when they woke up, they were all gone, and they were all for the bill. How did that happen?
Well, when a bill first, when members first start to contemplate a bill, they compare it to a perfect bill. What would they write? What do they want to see in it? And over time, as you get closer and closer to the deadline, you realize that that's kind of an absurd comparison. You really need to compare the bill before you with failure. You only get a yes vote or a no vote. And so as the holdouts realized that their no vote could kill the whole kit and caboodle, they understood that would be a shame. That would raise taxes on 80% of American families by an average of 22%. It would wash down the toilet all the investments in border security. It would eliminate, or it would undo the $1.6 trillion worth of mandatory spending cuts we desperately need as a country. That's how they got to yes. They realized they could not let perfect be the enemy of the good.
Ralph Norman, one of your colleagues from South Carolina, was on CNBC earlier today, and he said 2 things happened overnight. One, President Trump said he would address flaws in the bill through executive orders, and the president told those who are holding out, if you send it back to the Senate, it will only get worse. Is that true?
Yeah, I think sending it back to the Senate would probably make it worse. The reality is we have built a tenuous political balance here. You see in the Senate, they had one or two moderates and one or two hardline conservatives vote against the bill. And so it was right to the point where if you moved it one direction or the other, you might lose 7 or 8 votes on that side or the other. And so there was just no guarantee that failure in the House was going to make success more likely in the final product. And yes, Donald Trump, listen, he's the best closer in the business. He is a singularly powerful political figure in modern America. And when he explained, I was at the White House for 2 hours yesterday as he was talking to members about the value of getting this bill passed, the value of having these pro-growth policies, and while failure would be so bad for our country.
But can a president, through executive order, change legislative product?
Oh, no, I mean, the words on the sheet mean what the words on the sheet mean. I think what Ralph meant is that if there was a gap in the bill, something the bill didn't address that Mr. Norman wanted addressed, that maybe there were areas where the administration could do that through another mechanism. By the way, we've been having those conversations, not about executive orders, but about other legislative vehicles for months through this debate. Maybe there were some things the parliamentarian kicked out, so they can't be in reconciliation. Okay, rather than complain or pout, let's figure out another way. Does this make sense to include in the Farm Bill? Does this make sense to include in the annual defense bill? Does it make sense to include in the final appropriations package of the year? I mean, we do work around here every week, at least we're supposed to. And so just because you miss one train doesn't mean that you've got to give up hopes on getting your good policy done elsewhere.
Dusty, quantify the aspect of this that came down to political fear. You just can't cross Donald Trump if you're a Republican?
Donald Trump is a singularly powerful political figure in modern America, but that is, I mean, you never really want to cross the president of your own party. Democrats didn't cross Obama very much. They didn't even cross Biden very much, even as it was clear that he was becoming much diminished. It just, there is a sense that if you're going to get big things done, you got to do it as a part of the team. Sometimes I wish we viewed the team a little more often as America rather than the shirts and skins politics we have around here. But I think it's natural human. It's just, it's a part of the process out here.
Dusty Johnson, always appreciate your time, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
So to come right here on The Takeout, a better-than-expected jobs report helps boost the stock market. Our Kelly O'Grady will do what she always does. Break down the numbers and explain what it all means for the economy and possibly the future of interest rates. I'll get my grammar straight, I promise, next year on The Takeout. Welcome back. Thanks for hanging out with us. Jobs report came out today. 147,000 jobs added, and the unemployment rate ticked down 1/10 of a point to 4.1%. When you look inside the numbers, things were pleasant, but there are some surprises, not all of them pleasant. Help us break it down, as she always does, Kelly O'Grady. Kelly, do that for us. What's inside those numbers?
All right, so headline, really good, right? We were expecting about 110,000. As you said, we got 147,000. We're not falling off a cliff. But there were two things that really stood out to me. You mentioned the unemployment rate ticking down to 4.1%. That's good. We love to see that. But it was partially driven by less people actively looking for jobs. And that's important because that's part of how that unemployment rate is calculated. So that's one thing. We don't like less people looking for jobs. The other thing is that 147,000, how much was coming from the private sector versus government? You look at April, you look at May. We saw really good private sector growth, over 130,000 each month. That ticked down to 74,000 in June. So what that tells you is all the anecdotes that you and I have been talking about, how businesses are saying, hey, maybe I slow down on hiring or I even pause. That was actually reflected. Why we got the beat on expectations is because we saw a surge in government jobs. Not federal, right? We got the DOGE layoffs, but it was state and government, primarily in education. Think about the teachers, right? They're hiring them before going back to school. So when I look at this, it's a good jobs report, but it wouldn't have looked as good if we had that seasonal government hiring major.
Reporters at Andrews Air Force Base caught up with President Trump just a few moments ago, and he had an assessment about what the just passed economic agenda bill will do for the United States. Let's give it a quick listen.
We're sort of celebrating like the biggest bill of its kind ever signed, and it's going to make this country into a rocket ship.
Okay, Kelly, rocket ship, that is what the president, many Republicans say. Are there things in this legislation, which will be signed tomorrow, that the business community broadly looks at as beneficial and that could fuel some additional economic growth?
Absolutely. There's some definite wins for businesses. I was actually just reading part of it, and the manufacturing sector is going to be able to deduct the cost of building new manufacturing facilities backdated to beginning of January, mid-January. So that's going to be a good thing. But I think what's important to remember is whether you're talking about tax cuts or investment or cuts to certain programs, nothing ever happens in a vacuum, Major, when it comes to the economy. And a lot of this rocket ship talk is banking on the fact that we are going to get interest rate cuts. And you and I both know we don't know exactly when that is going to come. So that's sort of my caveat. Yes, there are some things that could get us on that rocket ship, and it also really depends on what income bracket you're in.
Kelly OGrady, as always, my thanks to you. Tomorrow is America's 249th birthday. How about a quick history lesson on the 4th of July? We could all use that, right? That's next, here on The Takeout.
Each of those men knew the penalty for high treason to the crown.
Even though we sometimes take the blessings of liberty for granted, millions of people around the world would give anything to share them.
We honor Jefferson's legacy by aiding the rise of liberty in lands that do not know the blessings of freedom.
In sequence, Presidents Reagan, Clinton, and George W. Bush rhapsodizing about July 4th, as presidents of the United States are wont to do. And while we celebrate Independence Day on the 4th, tomorrow, there have been arguments in our history that it should actually have been July 2nd. Notably, possibly most notably, that argument came from Flinty, and I say that with affection, founding father John Adams. His argument, the Continental Congress voted to declare our independence on the 2nd day of July. Adams even turned down invitations to celebrations on the 4th to show his displeasure with this particular turn of events. Presidential historian and professor at history at Rice University, Douglas Brinkley, a good friend of mine, joins me now. Douglas, always great to have you. Acquaint my audience with this old but seemingly fascinating debate over when we should declare our independence and therefore our birthday.
Well, happy 4th to you. Yes, I mean, you're right. I mean, it really is July 2nd, technically. John Adams is correct. He was the great parliamentarian where Jefferson was the scribe. You know, remember Jefferson holed up for 17 days in a little apartment in Philadelphia and wrote the Declaration, and we celebrate that. But it was really that was the day, July 4th, it kind of got told to the American people. And it got spread, the word of the new United States. So, you know, we've been traditionally bound to July 4th, but Adams and Jefferson feuded for most of their life. I mean, John Adams believed the American Revolution began with the Boston Massacre in his state of Massachusetts. Jefferson thought it had begun with Patrick Henry in Virginia. So they were always kind of gaming each other a little bit. But in the end, the 50th anniversary of the founding of America on July 4th, 1826, they both died. Jefferson and Adams, the exact same day on the 50th anniversary of July 4th. And later, James Monroe, our 5th president, and I consider him one of the founders, died on July 4th also.
And Douglas, it's worth just reacquainting ourselves with the fact that we sort of think about the founding fathers as always being on the same page. In large part, they were on the biggest questions. But there were divisions almost from the start. And of course, famously, in one of the most important elections in American history, because it was a transition of power, Adams and Jefferson were very much opposed to each other.
Oh, absolutely. They were constantly disgruntled with each other. Interestingly enough, you can look at Charles Thompson's letters. He was the secretary of the Continental Congress on the original printed declaration. There are two names, Charles Thompson and John Hancock. But New York was holding out at the last minute. It really was about to be 12. Only at the very last minute did New York kind of jump on board for it all. And the important moment, I think, in July 4th history, ironically, is the War of 1812. Washington, D.C. had been burned, and then, of course, Baltimore at Fort McHenry saved Francis Scott Key's Star Spangled Banner, what we're all singing this July 4th, came into focus and sway and the part of the national, really the anthem of our nation. And since then, it's the July 4th fireworks and displays have gone up and up and up. And it's just now the grand American tradition to sing and put patriotic banter and people dressed like Uncle Sam, or just go out and have a barbecue or a cheeseburger or relax in a state or national park. It's a great day for all Americans just to be Americans and be proud.
Doug, I'm grateful to have you with us, especially on this 4th of July tomorrow, because it will begin a year-long celebration and sort of absorbing of America at 250 years. How should we approach that year-long conversation?
It's going on now. Every institution that deals with American history is plotting what they want to do. People are booking entertainers already. I have a feeling President Trump will probably go to Mount Rushmore, which he's quite enamored with. And, they'll be opening a Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library in North Dakota next July 4th. Meanwhile, we saw Donald Trump for the Army's 250th birthday, how President Trump liked that military parade style in Washington. You'll see more of that. And then President Trump's trying to do a kind of sculpture garden of American heroes, and people are going to be debating who should we be honoring, who should we not, who's significant. But mainly, I hope we all celebrate 1976. Gerald Ford was president in the middle of an election year. Jimmy Carter, he ran against, and our country did, incredible things in New York with tall ships and fireworks at Disney World, and a train going around the country with moon rock and NBA basketball gear. And so it was. Hopefully, we'll be able to catch that spirit, that the old, up to the minute kind of spirit of, TikTok as we head into America 250.
America 250 with TikTok. Douglas Brinkley, always a pleasure, sir. Thank you so much. Before we go, you may have noticed my famous golden takeout tie rack right here. It's on the set every day. It's a reminder to those of you who can't remember or didn't know the first time, guests can leave a tie or take one of mine. A few months ago, I had what I called my Liberation Day, no more neckties. Well, I'm bringing all this up because earlier this week, former Chief of Staff at the DNC, Huie Moore, participated in our tie swap. I'm encouraging all my guests to get rid of one of their ties or pick up one of mine. Also on this program, I've sort of lost the thread about food, but today I've got it back. We've got patriotically themed cookies, which I'm going to devour after the show's over. That's it for this week of The Takeout. We're off tomorrow for the 4th. Hope you have a good 4th. If you missed anything, have no fear. It's all available on CBSNews.com, podcast platforms, and importantly, the Takeout playlist on YouTube. There you can find my interviews earlier this week with Michigan Senator Alyssa Slotkin, Connecticut Governor Ned Lamont, former Ambassador John Bolton, and so much more. Please stick around. The Daily Report is coming up next, right here on CBS News 24/7.